Welcome to this exponential webinar. I'm your host, Peyton Jones, and I am here today with Mindy Calaguire to talk about soul care. But the title today is Leading Strong. Let me tell you a little bit about Mindy. Welcome, Mindy.
Hey there.
Good to have you on here. She is the co-founder and president of Soul Care, a spiritual formation ministry that exists to increase soul health in the body of Christ. She serves as the executive leadership at Glue, and I was just telling her, I'm hearing about Glue all over the place. They're popping up everywhere. But wait, there's more. She also served prior as the director of transformation ministry for the Willow Creek Association. She speaks and advises organizations including Spire, Stadia Church Planning, Leadership Network, and Compassion International. And her books include where do you get time to do all this? Spiritual Transformation in Relationships, Become Like Jesus, Discovering Soul Care, Spiritual Friendship, Soul Searching and Simplicity, as well as Right for Your Soul, The Whys and Hows of Journaling. And she's got a really rad, if I can use that term, even though it's like 20-something years too late, soulcare.com. So Mindy, welcome.
Hey there, glad to be here. And the key to writing lots of books is to write very short ones. That's what I've learned.
I love that. I could actually, I just wrote a book on church planning and I was 150,000 words over word count. So I think I need to take a page from your book because now I have 2.5 textbooks. So you're not supposed to do that.
150,000 words over?
Yeah, it's a personal problem. So,
That's good.
I really, I'm excited to have you on here because we're not hearing as much about soul care as we normally do. In fact, we're noticing during the COVID-19 crisis that ministers are actually burning out faster right now. They're finding themselves more busy and less prepared. And I think what's getting kind of left behind in the dust or falling through the cracks is people's soul care. So we'd love to hear from you about, why is this topic so important to the leaders or just the individuals watching today?
Yeah, no, I think it's vitally important. And, I've been working with these themes with leaders for a long time now. And I would say it has been sort of bubbling under the surface for a lot of people as some pretty severe unhealth, but still kind of functional, right? It was functional unhealth that was allowing leadership still to go on week to week, day to day, month to month, and year over year. And in more private conversations, people would be more honest about what was unhealthy or unsustainable. And what you've said is exactly true. The church leaders that I've been talking to in a variety of contexts, like the last 2 months, have completely upended whatever hold on holding it all together we still had. And the level of pressure, the level of rethinking their jobs, unknown futures, so many things are impacting every industry, to be sure. But ministers and pastors and leaders in local churches and otherwise, they have had to do an about face and completely do things differently. And so whatever unhealth existed before, is just exacerbated by the demands of the moment. So while it's something that I certainly care a lot to have people talk about and pay attention to, I am finding there is an increased interest in talking about this because of the severity of some of the things that people are dealing with right now. So I was thrilled to be with you in this. Yeah, absolutely.
Well, thank you. And our title is Leading Strong. How does that tie in with soul care? What do we mean when we say leading strong during this time?
I think every leader knows, it's essential that you lead in a strong way. And I believe that the model of ministry that God has made available to us is one that our strength comes from our rootedness in Him, fundamentally. And yet, anybody who's been in ministry for more than 20 minutes knows that the pace of life of ministry can often very deeply threaten the well-being of our souls. And so by challenging us to think about what it means to really lead strong, my hope is that we can ground to the things that actually do drive our deepest strength. And I think that's needed more than ever right now. And I can drop into a couple of slides that I have prepared for us, but I didn't know if there's any other broad ideas that you wanted to mention as we get started. And just to clarify, I live and work in the executive leadership at Glue, but I'm not the executive leader at Glue.
Well, you just got promoted.
Yeah,
we promoted you.
I'm demoting myself. I'm demoting myself. Happily so. Well, we're graced to have an amazing godly leader, but I'm happy to serve there. But my passion for soul care and my role at Glue is all around helping people grow. That's the thing that has been the through line throughout my life. And so the things that Glue is about that as well. But let me just hop into some of these slides that I wanted to share. Can you see this? You can. I see a nod. There we go. Oh, and this is where I live now. Yeah, I spent 13 years in the Chicago suburbs with Willow in a variety of different places. Prior to that, I was a church planter. My husband and I had planted a church out in Boston. And so a lot of my passion for church planters and for the care of the soul absolutely comes out of the season of that in my life. But now I find myself looking at that view more often than not. That's my favorite view. I know, right? It just cares for you. Like everybody just can take a deep breath just reading, looking at that beautiful view.
I'm looking at that, Mindy, and I think they need a church plant there. So my wife and I are coming. We're moving there. I can just tell by the picture, church planting needs to happen there.
Actually, it's a really interesting thing you say that. For those who are familiar with the Boulder, Colorado area, it has a bit of a similar reputation to Boston in that it has been a difficult place for church plants. So I've loved getting connected to some of the church planters here in the area, and I am serving as a volunteer in the leadership of our church here in just outside of Boulder. It's about 5.5 years old. So it's really exciting to see what God's doing in this region. But yes, take a deep breath. Soul care, we want to bring leaders to life. So our point today, just really around leading strong, I just wanted to point out to everybody who's listening, I want you to really see if you believe this. Is it really entirely possible to live and lead from a healthy soul, even while you're homeschooling, being confined to home, taking care of your people well, hopefully, and I'm sure at least as best as you can, juggling these unknown financial realities, and then many are having to completely reimagine their entire ministry model. That is like no small task. Reallocate engineers, or not engineers, that's Glue. Reallocate volunteers, reallocating staff. I mean, it's a really significant moment that we're all in. But here's the thing I really want us to think about. I believe it matters more than ever that you find a way of life that allows you to anchor to those unforced rhythms of grace. And that's what we're here to chat through. And I'm also going to say this, Peyton, we talked about this ahead of time. I am highly interruptible. And so if you have a thought or if I've left something unclear, please just interrupt me. And I would much rather know where your head is and anybody else who has a question that you want to highlight.
Absolutely. Let me just remind everybody who's listening or watching today that if you have a question, we have a Q&A. You can pop that in the chat there off to the side. There's a Q&A tab at the bottom. And Mindy is more than happy to walk through all of your questions. So put those in there. And in a few minutes, I won't give a time, no pressure, but we're going to take your questions at a certain point. You'll get to interact with Mindy.
Awesome. Thanks. Yeah. I wanted to start out just with a story of something that happened to me a number of years ago. And actually, I'm going to stop sharing just for a second to be more connected to you all while I'm telling the story. So I was early on in my experiences of teaching. This is an unusual format. Many of you are now doing this for your churches, and it is unusual. But I was up in front of a room of people like we usually do, and it was a class. Some of you have been to the Willow Creek campus. It was in room 100 down below the chapel, and there were maybe 100 or so, 200 people at round tables, you know, a setting like that. And I was teaching through a curriculum that had been written by John Ortberg and Ruth Haley Barton called An Ordinary Day with Jesus. Great curriculum. And the format of it was an all-day Saturday experience. And so the first session, I was up in the front of the room and began doing the introduction and the first session and all this stuff. And I was noticing that there was a table kind of off to my right at the front of the room that was like not paying any attention to me whatsoever. And I don't know if you've ever had that as a communicator, and it, you know, it's like you're used to people are checking phones or this or that, but like there was one whole table that was like not paying attention to me at all. And it was a little distracting. So I like kind of was continuing to do the talk and continuing to try to check out what was happening. And as soon as I like paid a little more attention, it became clear, here's what was going on. That table was entirely made up of, well, mostly made up of people who were deaf. It was the deaf community at the church. And they had an interpreter who was interpreting as I was teaching. And it was such a powerful experience, not only in the moment when I realized what was happening, but for the entire rest of that day, to watch how freely and like almost effortlessly, the people at that table had no problem outright ignoring me and whatever else was going on in the room because they were so focused on their interpreter. And it became like the Holy Spirit just kind of saying, hey, notice, I want you to notice what's going on over there, because that is a group of people who have come to terms with what they can and cannot discern about what's going on around them, and have found a way of life that has them anchored to a person who can help translate what is happening in the room, despite what their ability to sense it might be. Does that make sense? It was, yeah, go ahead.
You know, I was going to say, so my uncle and aunt are deaf, and my nephew is partially deaf. So, like, I've been raised with this my entire life. So, I love where you're going with this. I love what you're saying.
Well, thanks for offering that. I have not had a family member or someone close to me who was in or is in that community, and so. I hope maybe someday I'll have more exposure to that myself, because it was refreshing. It was like the Spirit was just saying, Mindy, do those people look like it's an onerous thing to figure out how to pay attention to the interpreter? Do they seem to resist needing to turn and like watch you, but really listen to that person? And it was such an example. It's like, that was what if we put it into our terms, because you do know where I'm going with this, it's like our terms would be like, we live in a very chaotic and noisy world, now more so almost than ever. And in the context of that noisy and chaotic world, there is only one source that can actually help us interpret, understand, where is our direction? Where are we going? What is the best next move for us to make? What do our people need? What do we even need? There's a lot of noise that's going to try to answer those questions for you and for me. I'm in the same boat. But I loved seeing, and it's just delightful to reimagine. I can just still see that group of people. I loved seeing how effortless their practice, which you can imagine as a lifetime of practice, they had learned to, yes, notice what was happening around, but look to their interpreter to understand what was actually being said. And so for us, I think the parallel, is quite clear. And I hope that that is something that we can explore, like just some ways to, oh, look at me, I'm sharing my screen now. I know I have to find the right thing. There it is. Are you seeing it? Yes. Okay.
I'm
You can give
seeing
me a
an
thumbs up.
island. I'm seeing oh,
Still?
there it is. Yeah, I see it. Your slide's up. Why does it matter more than
Guys, I'm
ever
sorry.
that you do?
Yes. So I'm telling you, this is a time when no one was paying attention. And I did a little tiny study on this at that time. Many of you know what this is, the Latin for the ability. That's audir. What root word, right? That's for auditory, auditorium, things that have to do with hearing. What I also learned during that season, what this is the same root word for the word obey, and how closely tied in a very trusting relationship when we understand what is being said and who is saying it, that it is a natural movement into obedience. So yeah, just to reiterate, this is some of the things you were talking about earlier. I've talked to, at least 2 or 3 different church staffs in the last few weeks because of the stuff that's on here, right? There's a lot of distracting noise. The adrenaline rush was huge at first. Most churches, there's one pastor I talked to who said, Mindy, 3 months ago, our entire staff team would have felt theologically opposed to digital church. And in less than 3 weeks, we just became one. We have so much dissonance around things like that. Massive immediate transformation, the world's first digital Easter. And now, we're settling into who knows what. I've talked to staff teams that have had no days off in weeks, and everyone, ministry and otherwise, has got very few boundaries between work and personal life. And that's making it very difficult to do both. And I've noticed, maybe you have as well, these nonstop Zoom meetings are absolutely exhausting. One colleague said to me, how is it that all I do to go between meetings all day is just click a button, standing or sitting in the exact same place? And by the end of the day, I am exhausted. And what I've learned is it's actually very exhausting to not have the normal kinds of interactions we would have in a meeting or in a conversation, to key off of each other's body language, to key off of one another's just human energy. This is how we are. And it is very exhausting. Sometimes it's exhausting because you see yourself in those Zoom meetings and it's like, turn that image
That's the
off.
worst, right? That's the worst, because normally you don't have to look at yourself. And when you see yourself, it's terrible.
It's terrible. And then you can't stop, and then you feel vain for doing that. And then I found out I have a pro tip. There's a setting you can actually turn off your view of self, which there's probably some great spiritual metaphor in that. I don't know what it is, but
that's hilarious. Yes. Yes. Physically and spiritually. I want to do that.
That's a good point. So maybe we can suggest that to the Zoom people.
Where's that setting in my soul, Mindy? Where is that in my spiritual? Give me that toggle switch right now. If only it were that easy, right?
Oh, the freedom. This is an old song, makes me think of Michael Card's old song. But the phrase in there that you can't imagine the freedom you'll find from the things you leave behind.
Yeah. Good old Michael Card. Well done. I'm a fan.
I know. Love all his lyrics. Okay, so everything's changed. We have new job descriptions. People who were like small groups pastors are now like the digital online experience pastor. It's like just completely different. And I don't know about you all, but in our household, every night at dinner, we're talking about what other headlines we've read and what does it mean for the meatpacking industry and for the people of Ecuador and for when the borders will open up to different countries, and what does that mean for ministry? A lot of the people in my house right now that we're sheltering in place with, my family have been with YWAM and other ministries that their whole work is traveling around the world doing cool stuff, and no one knows when that's going to be a thing again. So there's just so much uncertainty. The people who are caring for young ones under under school age or even elderly that are nearby. I mean, just so many things. And then the sheer grief of it all, more and more close to home or close to our home stories of an aunt that has passed from COVID, or a congregant or a friend. And even if they haven't passed away, there's sickness and it's coming closer, and we don't know what this will mean. And then some of you on our call right now may know, I was horrified, frankly, but I heard that there was a pretty active conversation among pastors about what's your number, and is it 3 or is it 4? And most of the people in the conversation were reporting a 3 or a 4. Peyton, are you aware what that is related to?
No, is it views or?
Yeah, well, that would be hard. And no, and it's not Enneagram numbers either. It was about what's your average number of hours of sleep every night since this started.
Ouch.
And the consensus in the room was 3 or 4.
Ouch.
That's really hard. And if I can just say, when all those things conspire to be our normal right now, not only does it make it difficult to keep paying attention to the one person in the room, being the Holy Spirit, God, who can provide guidance and reassurance and comfort, it makes it harder to pay attention. But it also, to me, and this is part of why I believe this matters so much more now than ever, there is no human source of wisdom that any one of us can look to for guidance right now. And I don't mean to discredit really amazing leaders that God has put in place, and there are many. I think they would probably be the first to say, no one knows. And I think I would just love it to be the case that the people of God could carry a lightheartedness with that reality, to where we don't know the answers. Maybe we can help other people know how to be okay with mystery of not knowing. Maybe we can just say, I can be fundamentally well, even in the worst of circumstances, because of the reality of the kingdom of God. And I know how to rest my soul in the midst of active work, but I can be fundamentally well. And to me, I mean, Peyton, that's the hope of a well cared for soul, is a leader who is deeply at rest, but has an expansiveness to them and has generative energy that they can bring into the world, that has, hey, like I've heard from the interpreter in the room, and not in any weird, like, abuse of that kind of thing, but like, how are we dialing in toward God? I think the opportunities for innovation right now are unprecedented in the church. And while we can learn from businesses or this or that or other ministries, that's all great. But like, what ideas has nobody had yet? And how would we let the noise floor of our lives get low enough that we could hear the whisper of God, should there be an idea that he wanted to convey?
Okay, so right there, you're speaking to one of my passions. If I can just interject, because I know you like kind of like a more conversational. When it comes to innovation, I think we all fumble into it, but I also think, like you said, it comes from that place of kind of surrender and rootedness. Like every time I've been in a breakthrough, it's because I finally quit and gave up. I was like, God, I don't know what I'm doing. Like, you get in here and you do this. And my heroes are, they're not, I have pastoral heroes, I suppose, and preaching heroes like we all do. But my heroes in the realm of intellect and imagination would be George Lucas, Walt Disney, and Jim Henson. And all three of those, they pushed the bound. Like Jim Henson was like, I'm not just doing puppets, I'm doing Muppets, and they're going to be something you get, and he makes a dark crystal and it's still going on. Walt Disney goes, hey, in the 1950s now, I'm gonna do a submarine. He knew what carnivals were and he hated them. So he goes, I'm going to build this thing called Disneyland. Like exactly what you're saying there about, what is the next cool thing? And in each case, each one of these Imagineers, neither one of them was boisterous or, except for maybe they were all kind of introverts, really, which is kind of amazing. They lived in their head a lot, but I think it ties back to that soul care that there was a deep inner life of imagination and creativity. And I think it's the same in the soul, is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I fully agree with that. And I think the world, and even the Christian world, doesn't need more primarily intelligent, hardworking people. Like, that's a valuable thing, to be reasonably intelligent and hardworking. We need fresh thinking. We need fresh and not effortful. Like, I want to really cast this vision that what if 10 years from now we looked back on this time, 10, 15 years, and we said, there were things in my life that forever changed because of that season. I hope that's true. I hope that's true of me. I hope that's true of the emerging leaders that are living in my house right now. I hope that's true of everyone who's been, like all those airplanes in the airport's, been grounded. Everybody's stuck. And rightly so. Like, I'm not disputing that. It's tragic circumstances, but here we are. And wouldn't it be a wonderful thing if 10 years from now, 15 years from now, there was a whole tribe of leaders who would say, this fundamentally shifted in my life in terms of my ability to get into a place of silence, hear from God, operate from a place of rest, even though the world was on fire and my ministry was up in arms. What if I could find a way of being that allowed me to dip below that noise and actually hear from God, actually rest in silence? Because I believe that would absolutely change our leadership for the next 50 to 100 years. And I think the ideas that could be birthed in this moment of how a church is relevant to their community, every community is in pain. What is the church? How is the church showing up? We're trying to figure out how do people turn our congregations into an audience that's online. Fine, I get that. But, like, is there more? What else is happening? There's so much. Anyway, I'll be quiet
It's
about
so
that.
good. No, that's great. Two things. One is that Ken is saying, while you were speaking, they thought, the Horatio Spafford hymn, "It Is Well With My Soul," came into their mind. So you're really touching on something. And anonymous attendee, welcome, anonymous attendee. I've seen you before here. Said, wow, great point to something you said earlier. And this really resonated. I thought when you said that, it was the same thing, like when someone hits that tuning for, like, you just hear that. I think God walked through the room when you said this. They said, wow, great point. Nobody knows the answer, but can you expound again on that point where God knows, and having people be okay with mystery? I think
mystery.
Yeah.
Yeah. That is how we endure suffering is a really big part of what people are going to be seeing in all of the people of God, and particularly leaders right now. To pretend that we're not suffering, or that there are not things to be grieving in this moment, is, I fear, to put on like a happy face that's false and helps no one. I think in order for us to be authentic, we have to get, like, I need a journal early in the morning usually, that is a place where I slow down my own RPMs enough to get real with what actually am I feeling. I'm kind of on that, I tend to live in my head the most, and to drop into what am I actually feeling right now, and be able to put words around that, maybe just in my journal, but to others as well. There's all these great points, and many of you on this call are far more theologically trained than I. But there is fundamental mystery in the suffering that happens in our world. And there is mystery in how long God waits, apparently, to our timelines before intervening in a way that we recognize. right? How limited and small thinking is that? As if God isn't intervening all the time in ways that, like being deaf, we can't discern. So I think when I'm saying looking to God as that interpreter, I'm not meaning in any way to suggest there's a 3-point outline that the Holy Spirit's going to deliver about what your church needs to do in the next 10 days. Maybe that'll happen, I don't know. But I think if I were to extend the metaphor of that dependence for us and how we lead strong, many of the times when we sit, and I'm going to go through a couple different spiritual practices for us to think through, but many of the times when we sit in God's presence, it's a vital thing for us even to let go of our words and just rest in God's presence in silence. That is the ultimate entering into the mystery of what is he doing? I don't know. I'm not talking. Maybe God is, maybe God's not. Maybe I'm just with God in a painful place and allowing God to be with me.
That's so good.
Yeah.
I think leaders being able to even share that is really powerful. As we head into this Q&A portion, it's interesting because you just mentioned that you have some disciplines. That's one of our questions. What disciplines do you really do what disciplines do you do to really experience the presence and embrace? And I love that Jonathan Schaffner put that in there, the embrace of Almighty God.
That's
beautiful. Could you walk us through those?
I would love to. I'm going to pull out my little handy dandy this as well.
I'm in awe of your technical ability. I can't even do what you're doing right now. That's why we have Brooks.
It's all good. This is a fun little list. Before we get to that, I wanted to share this. Janet Hagberg, some of you are familiar with her writing of a book called The Critical Journey that's often cited, and rightly so, in spiritual formation conversations. But in a book that she wrote that actually preceded that book, it's called Real Power, and Understanding How Personal Power Shows Up in Organizations. It's a fascinating study. But she talks about these characteristics of people who lead from the soul. And I want to read through these and have us be imagining, what does this look like for the people of God, the leaders of it within God's purposes in our world, whatever title you have? What does it mean to be marked by these attributes? That they know intimately what it means to be part of or to create community. They do not depend on themselves for the vision of the organization. That's a big one for a lot of us on the call. They can give power away without feeling a loss of self. This one is important. They are peace-filled in crises as well as in calm times. And during crises, they do not revert to authoritarian or avoidance behaviors. They are connected intimately to a higher power. She is a devoted Christian. She thought this book was so important. She wanted to make it accessible to people of all backgrounds. And so her reference to higher power is an acknowledgement of that.
You're talking to the choir here, because I used to be a rehab counselor. Used to be an RN and worked rehab. So I love that she did that. So many people come to Christ through her approach.
Yeah, a lot of the people who influenced me strongly in my journey in Boston came from 12 steps. They do not project their pain or addiction on others. They do not burn out or succumb to stress. Think about that, guys. What does that mean? That is a marker of leading from the soul. They practice integrity, reflection, collaboration, have a strong sense of humor and creativity. This is the point you were making, Peyton. They are courageous. We need that, guys. And above all, they are life-giving. That's a great list. I want I want to be marked by those things.
Amen.
But that's the why, and I want to kind of think about the how. And I wanted to just cover a few things: some ways of prayer, some ways of calming, and some ways of connection. And on the prayer one, if you think about, and hopefully this will answer the question, I think your name was Jonathan, about multitasking. If there is a multitasking continuum, these two forms of prayer that I'm going to talk about are at the vast extremes of a multitasking continuum. So the first I'm going to talk about is inward prayer. Is a great quote from Dallas Willard, that spiritual people are not those who engage in certain spiritual practices. They are those who draw their life from a conversational relationship with God. And that was in his book, Hearing God. So we're talking about practices, but let's never forget that the point of the practice isn't the practice. The point of the practice is to draw our life from God. And so this is what I've just introducing to you from an author, Thomas Kelly, who wrote a book, A Testament of Devotion. He was a Quaker writer back in the 1940s. And he has this great book, and then in it describes what he calls inward prayer. And listen to this, that there's a way of ordering our mental life on more than one level at once. On one level, we may be thinking, discussing, seeing, calculating, meeting all the demands of external affairs. But deep within, behind the scenes, at a profounder level, we may also be in prayer and adoration, song and worship, and a gentle receptiveness to divine breathings. And I want to pause there. That gentle receptiveness is the kind of paying attention, this cultivating of a constant paying attention, even while we're teaching, while we're leading meetings, while we're working on budgets, taking care of kids, whatever we're doing. This is the inward prayer. The secular world of today, and I would think sometimes even the ministry world of today, values and cultivates only the first level. That's the level of thinking, discussing, seeing, calculating, right? Assured that that is where the real business of mankind is done. Like, what's your vision? What's your strategy? Boom, 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 all these things. Not that they're not important, but sometimes we smile or scorn or smile in tolerant amusement at the cultivation of that deeper second level. It's like, oh, it's a luxury enterprise, a vestige of superstition, an occupation for special temperaments. Oh, that's what the introverts do, the contemplatives. But in a deeply spiritual culture, people know that the deep level of prayer and of divine attendance, there's that idea of paying attention, is the most important thing in the world. It is at this deep level that the real business of life is determined. Friends, I think this is one of the things that we can cultivate in the middle of a quarantine, stay at home, shelter in place kind of life that is full of dishes that need to be done and meals that need to be cooked and kids that need to be homeschooled and messages that need to be video recorded and muscles you've never had to use before that you have to do. We can just be striking up a conversation with God at this sort of under the surface layer. But I want to suggest that that last line, this is what I love about Thomas Kelly as a writer, is his imagination is that that conversation, that prayerfulness, that paying attention to what God is doing is really where the real business of life is determined. That's where, when you're in a meeting and it's going south and nobody knows what's happening, and you don't need to say anything, but you can just begin praying. God, what do you want to have in here? God, would you please make a way where we don't see a way? Friends, I just believe that's where mountains start to move. And you probably have mountains in your life that need to move. And I want to encourage you that this sort of form of prayer, this inward prayer, is something that can be extremely helpful as you're cultivating that deeper level. The second thing is a practice that was introduced to me when I was living in Boston. I just call it silent prayer. We see this depicted in Psalm 131, where I've stilled and quieted my soul. And in fact, it goes on, like a weaned child on its parent's lap is my soul within me. So it's that picture of being held, as the question said, in the embrace of God, right? And it's a wordless way of resting in the presence of God with an attitude of openness, contrition, and longing. This is a very hard form of prayer for leaders because we're so used to depending on our words. And our words is how we cast vision, it's how we teach, it's how we recruit, it's how we raise money. It's all those different things are very full, and we feel very, and rightly so, it's a big part of your gifting. A big part of our dependence is on our words. And so I know for me and for many other leaders, this setting aside of like actual silence, like that's why it's at the other end of the multitasking continuum. It's like you need 20 minutes, 30 minutes, 10 minutes, some chunk of time to truly bring your mind into a place of stillness where you're not thinking thoughts about God, you're not singing songs, you're not even like listening, like, God, what are you saying to me? It's not about words. And in fact, I find this idea that it becomes a silent assent or permission giving to the inner workings of the Holy Spirit, where you're basically saying, have your way. You don't need to tell me what you want to do in my interior world. My heart is, my soul, my person is as wide open to the living God as I know how to be. And I want to learn to rest. Usually, guys, I can tell how ramped up my interior world is by how long it takes me to get to a place where even my breathing stops being super shallow and starts to be deeper. I can tell how amped up my interior world is by how distracted I am and how many thoughts just keep coming and going. And it's just an important way that gradually I keep pulling that thought back. I enter into this thinking, okay, what's a word that describes my desire for God? It could be just grace or the person of Jesus, or it could be strength or weakness. It could be any number, but that word I'll use then during that 20 minutes to let my mind get still, let my heart get still. And then I start thinking about something and it's like, oh, no. This time is about stillness. I want to let my soul rest in God's presence. And
it's so good, Mindy.
yeah.
One of the things that Carolyn writes in here, she says, what you're talking about is what God has called me to get our church to, congregation and communities, to be ready for the disaster we're encountering. I've been very concerned for our church and pastors during this crazy time. Thank you for bringing this subject up. And I love her final point, which is the survival of the church is counting on our leadership. And I love how, she gets it. She's like, you know what? Like everything you're talking about here, if that's not there, we're in more trouble than we thought from COVID-19.
I do believe that's the case. And like I said earlier, for so many leaders, you guys were already at near breaking points before this crisis hit. And I get it. I'm sympathetic to it. I talk to leaders all the time from all over the place. The pressures are real. The demands are real. In many ways, in my view, the local church pastor, as we currently define it and experience it, is an unwinnable scenario. The time for innovation, the time for reformation, the time for some new thinking, some new ways, not from drivenness and striving and chest pounding, angst filled drama, but from those unforced rhythms of grace. I believe the opportunity for the body of Christ to step into the crisis in our world as an agent of healing, innovation, creativity, peace, compassion, presence. These are things that have historically marked the people of God in times of worldwide crises. And we can do this, we can be this, but we can't do it in our own strength. We absolutely cannot. And if we're learning a way of life, and if this crisis causes us to drop into a way of life that allows us to receive our strength from God, to receive our life, our very life from God, that would be an amazing victory in the midst of a very, very painful reality.
Yeah, that's true. And I love David Bachman on the tail end of that said, in what way is a challenge like today a test of our character?
Yeah, I mean, crises reveal things, right? Trauma, trials, anything, it reveals, it's the classic, here's a cup of something, you're full of something, right? And the crisis tips it over, and only in a crisis do you find out what was really inside. And that's what we're finding. And it doesn't need to be a judgment thing. It's like, we're going to all find out that we were insufficient. We're going to all find out we were impatient, self-centered. I need that button to click off my view of self. Peyton, I think you're onto something there. That is me, that is us. But I do believe it, a crisis has the opportunity both to reveal but it can be a wake-up call to start reimagining, what do we want? What do we want the experience of ministry leadership to be like? What do I want my relationship with my family to be like? Many in ministry have a very polarized, here's my work and here's our family. And I try to keep those at odds so they don't infect each other. And I've been there. I don't say that with judgment, but I love thinking like, well, what if we started having some new thoughts about what kind of life and ministry we want to have and to lead? Anyway, those are some thoughts. I thought I wanted to introduce, I've never heard of this as a spiritual practice, so I'm sort of making it up. But I was looking at two of the favorite quotes that I have and that I like looking at when it feels like everything's falling apart. And Julian of Norwich and Teresa of Avila, two ancients, but beautiful, beautiful quotes that I bring to mind at times. Julian felt that God had revealed a statement to her that all would be well, and all shall be well, and all manner of things shall be well. And I think that would be kind of like the person who mentioned the hymn, "It is well with my soul." It's good for us to, in the middle, it's one of the ways that it helps us endure suffering, is to re-anchor to that eternal truth that all fundamentally, in the end, go read the end of Revelation if you need a refresher, all will be well, and all shall be well, and all manner of things shall be well. I think it's important for us to realize as we say things like that, though, that this doesn't say, my bank account will be full, my kids will, whatever is our worry, fill in the blank for your kids, and all manner of my, number of viewings for my weekend services will be well. It does not say that. And this, how we deal with pain, with suffering, with loss, guys, we have a foundation that we can stand in the middle of pain and suffering and loss and still be fundamentally well, and bring that posture of peace of it to the world.
I
All right, in
love,
this one,
Mindy.
go
sorry.
ahead.
I love that you're bringing this out, and I love that the people watching right now, they're having a sense of this, like they're speaking into rhythms and things that you're already saying, which to me is always like, okay, this is a prophetic moment, because Jesus says, "Let the churches hear what the Spirit is saying." And I feel in this time, you're talking about, hey, there's that, drowning out the noise, in your illustration in the beginning, hearing, I like to think of it that maybe pastors are being given a sabbatical to learn what you're talking about, but are we hearing what the Spirit is saying to the churches? And I just sense like God is really speaking to people during this. I mean, I host webinars for Exponential all the time. It's becoming a regular rhythm, but I'm really, there's such a synergy today on what you're saying with what's coming. There's an echo coming back is what I'm trying to say from people today. It's encouraging.
This is another great one. Thank you for saying that. I appreciate it. May that be the case. I've wondered sometimes how many of us were saying in our thoughts or in our journals. I know I have probably breathed these words. Maybe you guys have too. Oh, I just wish the world would, I can't, like, the world isn't going to come to a screeching halt so I can go figure XYZ out. And it's like, guys, the world just came to a screeching halt. And the wineskins that we've been living with for the past 50 to 100 years have just shattered. And there's still wine. The kingdom is still very much at work. And
that is super profound.
They just shattered. They're gone. And getting back isn't really the thing. I don't, in my view, I don't think that's the thing. But what doors have opened? What will the new wineskins be? That is a very curious topic, and we could go on for another hour on that. But I love this prayer as well, or sort of speaking over us. Let nothing disturb you. Let nothing make you afraid. All things pass. But God is unchanging. Patience is enough for everything. You who have God lack nothing. God alone is sufficient. And for me, the dipping into silent prayer has always been an important way to experience that. Wrapping up a couple next steps for people, and then if we have time, I would still love to chat with anybody or do some back and forth if we have time. But I wanted to give you guys a couple of next step opportunities. Soulcare.com, as we mentioned at the top, has been a domain that I've used, my husband has used. Now a whole team of us are coming together, a virtual team of spiritual directors, leadership coaches that all have this underpinning of understanding the challenges of leadership and understanding the unforced rhythms of grace, and that we want that to drive our leadership, not the reverse. And so there's a QR code there. You can pull out your cell phone and scan it, and it will drop you into a thing that is a little soul care growth journey that I've created. It's got some assessment, a downloadable devotional you can get to, some audio experiences that I recorded some time ago and might be of value to you. I was just trying to think of things I could make available. And then back to our view. But I'd love to keep in touch with you guys. Instagram is probably where I'm most active, and even then I'm not terribly active, but need to get better at that. And that was what I planned on. So Peyton, if you have any other thoughts or any other questions that are emerging from our folks.
Yes, for sure. For sure. A couple of things that have come from the Q&A. I really like anonymous attendee has another question, which is, it's okay that you don't want to tell us who you are. It's okay.
Totally fine.
Anonymous attendee, we love you. Jesus knows your name. No, sorry, I'm being stupid. Okay, so I like what he, she, we don't know. What is a starting point for church leadership wanting to set rhythms, culture of soul care for their staff and the congregation? I love that. Well, if I want to use this time to hit a reset on my team, how do I do that? Yep,
great question. The first things that come to my mind for you are to do, depending on your role, but assuming you're a senior leader or the senior leader, I would really recommend that you get super clear on how important exactly is this to you. And then decide, what do you want your staff to experience? What do you want it to feel like to be part of your church? What do you want? How do you want your church showing up? How do you want your staff to be resourced? Maybe some of the ideas we've talked about today would be helpful to you or compelling, and you'll have ideas of your own. But I think until you have that deep sense for yourself what that looks like, and put some more tangible things on it. I want my worship leader to feel blah. I want my children's ministry pastor to experience XYZ. I would want any small group leader who's involved with our church to how would you answer those questions, and let your own imagination move forward and be bold in it. Like, if there's a time to make some prophetic moves in a very different direction, could we not all say we're done with leaders dying in the name of giving people life? Like, could we at least have a moment of saying that's a really bad and not strategic way to lead in the body? So if you could say at the beginning, I don't want my leaders dying for the sake of helping other people live. So that's our baseline. And where do we go from there? And then I think the where we go from there could involve working with your staff to help them start an honest conversation about the health of their soul. What are their symptoms of soul health and neglect? We all have both. I have found that exercise to be a very useful way to almost immediately have people start thinking, oh, wow, I look a little bit more like the symptoms of soul health than I would symptoms of soul neglect. And in a very non-judgy way. And guys, this can never be judgy. This is with compassion and humility. We say, hey, which of these do you want? And then we help them want the same thing that you want for them. And as that starts to blossom, because a lot of us, I mean, let's be honest, a lot of people in ministry have lost hope that it can ever be anything other than a mad scramble. And I was just saying this to somebody last night. I always feel like hope is one of the most dangerous things in the world. And I feel it now because I feel like all of you guys are kind of listening to this going, is this real? Could I really live that way? And I felt like I had my hope dashed in so many different ways in ministry, and you have too. And
what are you talking about?
You know, right?
Just joking.
It's like, I was like, don't you dare activate my hope if you can't come through. If what you're talking about does not actually help me live differently, then don't activate my hope. And so your staff is going to be feeling that way too. Like, okay, you're saying you care about our souls, but what does that look like when the video needs to be edited 5 times again before Sunday morning? You know.
Yeah, you know, and you mentioned something there, Mindy, like, you know, I can't remember if it was Rick Warren or somebody that they were saying that the chief thing that they look for in a minister when they hire is brokenness. And they say, I always look for a story. I'm not looking for gifts. I'm not looking for talents. We were just on a call with Andy Stanley this morning. He was saying, look, talents will only get you so far. It might get you where you're going, but only maturity will keep you there. And I think kind of like I don't remember what stupid movie it was I was watching where 2 guys are about to get in a fight. And the one guy says to the other, your mouth keeps writing checks your body can't cash. No, don't question my taste in movies, but that's a great quote. And I think that's what happens, right? We speak for a living. We're writing all these checks and our soul can't cash them. We're not doing and saying all the things, and the people closest to us on our team, they know this. And then when we're up front, I think that probably the most helpful thing that all of us can do as leaders is volunteer first where we're screwing up, because they see it. We just don't tell them, right? Yep. We think they don't. I mean, one of the biggest problems with leaders, we think people are dumber than they are. And, you know, they're smart enough to figure out, no, we see that. We just don't know if you see that. And so I think just being able to share that.
And I think actually that raises the point. A lot of leaders, somebody asked a question about a red flag. A lot of leaders aren't self-aware enough to know that they are in a really dangerous place. And so it's hard to lead out around that if you don't see it in yourself.
That's so good.
I think while the person did ask, you know, if I wanted to bring this to my staff, which I'm thrilled, I'm glad you're asking, and please reach out to me in other means. It'd be fun to keep that conversation going. But if you're hearing this today and you're like, I can't remember the last time I felt like my soul was really at rest, and I'm not sure I want that because then I wouldn't be as productive, that might be a red flag. And I think you should know that connecting to someone else, could be a mentor in your network that you're already connected to, could be a spiritual director or a coach who understands the importance of these things, not a coach that's going to go tell you how to be more productive only. And
so good. That's so good, Mindy.
We need other people. We absolutely do. We all do.
Well, look, guys, couple things. Tomorrow night, we've got Exponential at Home, which is all about the soul care. So if you have not caught the first 2, you can catch them on a replay. You can head on over to exponential.org. Be sure to catch the one tomorrow night. We're really trying to double down on soul care. It's just what we feel the Spirit's led us to over at Exponential. Mindy, I can't thank you enough for coming on today and speaking. I know everybody's enjoyed it. That quote, by the way, was Top Gun. Thank you, anonymous attendee. You're a stud. And
that is awesome.
That's in there from when I was 14 years old. But anyways, we want to thank you for joining us today. By all means, keep checking in with Exponential. If you go to exponential.org today, you'll see our regionals that are there. We've got our next one coming up in Boise in the fall. We've got a bunch more, DC, Dallas. We've got them all over America. We want to help you multiply. I want to thank you for joining us today. Be sure to head on over to soulcare.com. You will not forget soulcare.com. That is the best domain name ever. And for all the questions we didn't answer, we apologize. But head on over to soulcare.com, catch up with Mindy there, and we'll see you next time on our Exponential webcast.
Peyton, thanks so much. It was great to be with you.
Awesome. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye, guys.